Before we begin, we have something we need to say to our lovely audience.
This video will contain content of a very adult nature and sexual theme, and while nothing explicit will be shown here, there will be discussions of such topics, so viewer discretion is advised.
But another version of this video has been made that features uncensored footage and a few extra naughty jokes, so if you wish to view it, come to our Discord and learn about our new adult-themed channels.
Though be aware that we will be implementing a very strict screening process to ensure that those who wish to join are above 18 years of age.
And now, let's start the video.
Alright me darlings, and welcome to the first of what I hope to be many videos delving into some more adult content. And we're starting off with a doozy today with the French web series Peepoodo.
Oh wow, I can't wait to see whatever's coming next.
That sounds like the name of a cartoon show about a character with some very filthy habits.
Well, you're not far off there. But before we get into the show, let's go over a brief history of hardcore adult animation. I went over a brief history of adult animation in my Rick and Morty video and the ways in which it has evolved since the 1930s, but there was one part I glossed over a bit. Explicit animation. As in, animation that is made to be as blunt and upfront as possible in showing you things that, well, let's just say that kids aren't supposed to see. I mentioned this with the German pornographic cartoons that started in the 20s and had a revival in the 60s and 70s, and the infamous Fritz the Cat, both of which of these were designed to be more like spoofs rather than straight up porn, and today we're looking at something that can sort of fit into both categories. There were other forms of more explicit animation, like Ralph Bakshi's follow-ups like Coonskin and Heavy Traffic, and some of the movies that followed from his example like Heavy Metal, Tarzoon and Down and Dirty Duck, and some even had Disney-level animation and voice actors like Once Upon a Girl, but none of these were really made to be straight-up porn, though as I said before, there were some being made in Germany that sort of were, often shown as the equivalent of the cartoon before a main movie in old movie theatres, only in this time in porn theatres.
Do you think they did a newsreel of what's going on in the porno world today as well? I'd love to see that.
Given that this was the 1970s, they'd probably be really depressing, mostly on which porn star had just died from a drug overdose, syphilis, or being involved in a mob hit. And of course, Japan was starting to get into the flow with some of the first hentai ever made, like Midori and Cleopatra, Queen of Sex. After the 70s though, adult animation seemed to take more of a back seat, which is not surprising. I mean, why spend thousands of dollars and several weeks animating a porn when you can just find a woman on the street, give her $50 and some cocaine and shove her into a studio? There were a few standalone experiments that came out, like Snow White the sequel from Belgium and George the Hedgehog from Poland, which for the record, I want to point out how I found out about that movie because people say that if you Google any name followed by the Hedgehog, you'll find a Sonic fan character. I did out of curiosity on my own name, and this popped up, and in a weird way, I'm actually kind of proud of it.
I wouldn't say you have anything in common with that character, though.
Why? Because I'm not an alcoholic womanizing sleazebag?
No, because he's got a lot more hair than you.
Ha 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 ha, very funny. Maybe I should shave you and see how you like being made fun of being bald. However, like with most adult industries, it hit a new wave of success when the internet came along. Now there's more cartoon porn than you could ever want.
Or possibly need.
You can never have too much cartoon porn.
However, like most of the efforts from the previous century, most of these explicit cartoons had rather basic animation, and unlike those efforts, were intended to be straight up porn with only minor comedic elements to them, whereas most explicit cartoons of the 20th century were made to be comedies first, that just happened to have porn in it. Someone really needs to bring balance to this dichotomy, and that's where you go to the country that has balanced comedy with sleaze for as long as anybody can remember. Le Français. Enter comic artist and writer Balak, known for his comic Last Man and having done some work with Marvel, though I primarily know him for his character Maxine, but we'll get into that later. He basically came up with the idea of a spoof of a children's educational show, but done with adult themes, and while granted it's not the most original idea, people have been doing that since the 80s, they certainly have not gone quite to this level that that he did. He also wanted to make the show actually educational for its audience by having it educate them on sex facts that they may not have known beforehand. That's actually kind of cool that it provides the show with a purpose beyond just being the ultimate evolution of Meet the Feebles. And thus, Peepoodo was born. The animated web series, which did enjoy a brief televised run in mainland Europe.
I'm guessing this run didn't last long for a very obvious reason.
Well, that goes without saying. And was about the seemingly innocent adventures of its title character, the pink hamster Peepoodo, and his friends Kevin the polar bear, Tuffalo the buffalo, and Dr. Monique Pussycat. Now there's a name that would put Bond girl names to shame.
I hope you're not going to be one of those Russian agents whose name is just a cheap sexual pun, Miss Suck Me Off.
So, what does this show do then? Well, I think a better question would be, what doesn't it do? The show certainly doesn't waste any time with letting you know what its deal is with the very first moment of the theme song.
My name is Peepoodo. I like to sing on sunny days.
Obviously, if you're watching the version formatted for public view on YouTube, you won't exactly be seeing what I'm talking about right now. But you can probably guess what it is with the censor bar there. Oh yes, pretty much every character in this show, well, almost every character, goes pantsless, despite how the fact that some of them still wear shirts, and they make the characters as anatomically correct in that area as they possibly can. The idea of the joke is how a lot of cartoon characters, particularly vintage ones who are animals, don't wear pants. So they basically made the joke of, well, if they don't wear pants, why don't we see their genitalia? Admittedly, it's not the most nuanced or witty joke out there, but believe it or not, that's actually one of the more subtle jokes in this series. I'm just glad that you don't follow the same attitude, Huck.
You think I want people seeing all I have to offer all over the internet? I have some modesty and restraint, you know.
That's a surprise to me. You've done everything in your power to try and upstage me ever since you came onto this show. I'm genuinely shocked you haven't tried that yet. Yes, the series goes into almost every place you'd never expect a cute cartoon character to go to. Well, unless you're on Rule 34, that is. They cover things like female and male masturbation, the prostate, Viagra, VR sex, STDs, and a few other things I'm pretty sure I'm not even allowed to mention here on YouTube. I'm sure that even describing the events of episode 3 in detail would probably be enough to get my channel demonetized. So let me put it this way. Peepoodo invites his friends from Germany over, and in a show about sex jokes made in France, and just think about the fact what Germans are most famous for in the world of kinky sex. Oh yeah, I'm sure you can imagine. I'm just glad he didn't invite a friend over from Thailand. All of those ping pong balls. This sounds debauched and obscene, and granted it is, but what makes this show good and funny is that the characters still act like the kinds you would normally see in a little kids show like Peppa Pig or Dora the Explorer, and seeing these kinds of characters interact with these overtly sexual... Actually, that word's not evocative enough. What else can be used in place of that phrase?
Warts and all portrayal?
Not bad.
Not beating around the bush?
Well, actually they do in a few episodes, but that's not important right now.
Shamelessly?
Yes, that's it. The shameless depiction of these very adult themes in contrast with the bright, colourful, and on-the-surface kid-friendly imagery. Well, so long as the characters are only being shown from the waist up. Do you reckon that's why they do the same for the Muppets? I mean, they already spend most of the day with a hand up their arse, so I think they'd be into that sort of thing.
Don't you dare insult the Muppets in front of me.
Okay, I didn't know you were a Jim Henson fan.
He was a legend, and I'll defend him till the day I die.
You're just saying that because you want a second series of Dark Crystal, don't you?
I can dream, can't I?
But yeah, this incredibly drastic contrast is one of the things that makes the show work. Granted, that stark contrast can be a bit shocking to some people and be a turn-off to them. But to be fair, that's kind of the point of the show. It's meant to be shocking because it's trying to take us out of our comfort zones and treat sex in a more open-minded way. And the fact that the main characters are so innocent, sometimes anyway, helps put you in a childlike mindset and helps take the sting out of that rough edge of this subject matter. Though of course they also did it like this because it's just funny to have kids show characters talk about these kinds of things, but there is a deeper meaning here still. The educational aspect of the show also helps with that too. Yes, Dr. Pussycat isn't just a doctor for nothing, you know, in the first series she comes out to help provide sex education about the major subject of the episode in question. And to be honest, they're actually really fascinating. There's actually some facts in this show that I did not know beforehand that it actually educated me on.
The pills you take contain sildenafil citrate, used to treat erectile dysfunction, which also lowers blood pressure. Grapefruit juice increases blood pressure, and so it cancels out the effect of erectile dysfunction drugs. As a rule, body hair has a protective function. It stops the skin from being irritated by friction. Without it, the skin is much more vulnerable to outbreaks and infection.
Huh. So I guess that's why spots always appear on my head after I've given myself a haircut.
Just on your head?
Well, I may be tempted to shave other parts of my anatomy, but it's not the rash that frightens me off, it's the feeling of having my hair grow back there after a few days. It's like a million sharp needles poking through my skin from the inside.
Ouch.
Granted, this element of the series sadly gets dropped by the second one, but we'll get into that later. Peepoodo himself is such a fun character. As I said before, he's naive and innocent, and that coupled with the great voice that both his French and English voice actors do for him.
Hey there, guys. I don't think it's very nice to spy on people when they're taking their bath. You shouldn't do that.
Les copains, je sais pas si c'est très bien d'espionner les gens quand ils prennent leur bain. Vous devriez pas faire ça.
Makes him not only adorable, but his reactions to what happened on the show are priceless, especially the grapefruit episode. However, he does have a dark side, but we'll get onto that later on. Kevin initially starts off as your typical dumb character, but about halfway through the first series, he admits to have been going through an identity crisis, and I will admit the way they handle it in the show is actually very mature and delicate.
I was just thinking that maybe I need to get my head straight and get myself some space.
Get some space? Why?
At the end of said episode, he decides to not pretend anymore and becomes Evelyn. And it's kind of cool that this show does actually have a sense of progression in how some of its characters do go through arcs. Unfortunately, there's not much to say about her after that. Once she becomes Evelyn, she more or less becomes a peripheral character who rarely contributes to the major plots of the show. And granted, even before her change, she didn't get that involved either. But one of the downsides of her change is that her personality becomes less distinct and she becomes much less memorable or engaging. But still, I will give this show credit for going somewhere I did not expect it to go. I mean, in an emotional sense, there's still plenty of places this show goes that I didn't expect it to go in a visual sense either.
And I've seen your search history, so if this show can make you feel shocked, that's quite an accomplishment.
Then there's Tuffalo, a stereotypical muscle-minded dude-bro who is very brash, condescending, and a total jerk.
When you got angry before, it wasn't your fault. It was because you had your period. Am I right? Huh? That's it, right?
And is obsessed with showing off his manliness, but is easily the most pathetic of the group, which given how Peepoodo's main thing as a character is being innocent and naive around all the sex scenarios on the show, that's saying a lot. Most of his jokes revolve around the classic jerk getting taken down a peg style of humour, and it works very well, especially since he is such an arsehole. In one episode, quite literally. But obviously we can't show that here. His English voice actor really does make that come true, even more so, since he gives Tuffalo such a cartoonishly jag-off voice.
Go shame! Ooh, you're an embarrassment.
And it really makes the character come to life and makes his comeuppances in the episode all the more satisfying. Unfortunately, the same can't quite be said for his French voice actor, who gives him a very strange, almost goofy-like voice.
En fait, les premières relations amoureuses, c'est toujours assez décevant.
And it really doesn't work for me. It makes him seem more like a guy with brain damage pretending to be a jerk rather than just a jerk. Though to be fair, that also could kind of fit with his character. And then there's the most popular character of the series, Dr. Pussycat. And I'll give you one, or rather, two big reasons why.
Quit drooling over her, you perv. Haven't you learned anything from what she said?
It's totally unrealistic to experience sexual desire for a cartoon character. Good grief.
I'm talking to a cartoon fox right now. I think I left Mental Stability a long time ago. Her character is the most grounded in the whole series, often being the voice of reason, and almost acting like a mother in some episodes to the rest of the cast, which sort of has a double purpose in the show, since it not only educates the audience, but it educates the characters in the show and lets them learn how to get out of the problems they're in.
It's normal and healthy to masturbate, but if it turns into an addiction, it can totally destroy your social life. Well done, Evelyn. I'm so proud of you.
All of these characters are great, and while they do change a bit throughout the series, at their core, they're still the same people, or animals, and one of the things that helps that is the incredible voice acting, as I touched upon earlier. As of yet, only the first series is dubbed into English, which is a shame, but the voice acting in both versions is mostly excellent. I'll be going over the English cast first, since both series use the same cast for the original French recording, but there's a certain voice actress who deserves to have the reverence of being mentioned last, so I'll get to her at the end. I already went over Tuffalo, who is voiced by Douglas Rand in the English dub, and Bryce Chevalier in the French version. But as I said before, Douglas does do a fantastic job, but Bryce's voice I feel doesn't quite fit the character. Although Tuffalo's character does become much more exaggerated and even more pathetic in the second series, so it does fit better there.
Un magnétoscope! Vous pouvez pas mourir sans l'avoir vu au moins 3 fois! Oh, ma cassette!
Kevin/Evelyn is voiced by Balak himself in the French version and David Gassman in the English version, although, to be fair, until I looked up the voices, I actually thought it was the same guy for both dubs, since they sound almost identical.
That's what this evil curse really is. Being a slave to others' ignorance.
La voilà, la véritable malédiction. Être esclave de l'ignorance des autres.
This coming from a guy who sounds like if C-3PO grew up in Sussex.
Hey, a bit of class can go a long way in a voice. Maybe you should try it sometime. Either way, they both do great jobs, making the character seem a bit simple and slightly gruff, but friendly and endearing, and they both really pull off the emotion when Kevin is confiding in Dr. Pussycat about his identity issues. In the English version, both Peepoodo and Dr. Pussycat are voiced by Barbara Weber-Scarf, who you may recognise from other French projects such as Code Loco and Raving Rabbids.
What the fuck are you people doing? Dr. Pussycat, let me have her period!
So what? I'm on mine too.
She does an excellent voice for both, with giving Peepoodo a very innocent, childlike voice that never goes into the realm of annoying, but matches with his naive personality.
You two should be ashamed.
Need some help, you little perv?
Hi, ma'am. I was just explaining to my friends that...
And with Dr. Pussycat, she gives her the perfect, very soft, sultry voice, but is still able to give her a very well-toned voice for the more comedic elements when she changes her mood, but still very believable that she is the same character.
You took some anti-impotence pills less than an hour ago? Grapefruit! Tell me, do you often have grapefruit?
The French version of Dr. Pussycat is voiced by Jean Catier, whose voice for the Doctor is a much more high-pitched and cartoony sounding version, but is still able to get into that same kind of area with the character being very sexy in some points of the show, but very funny in others.
Chez la femelle panda, la période d'ovulation n'est que de 72 heures par an. Il ne nous reste plus que 45 minutes pour féconder Franck. Aucun stimulus ne semble fonctionner. Il doit pourtant bien y avoir un moyen de...
And of course, there are other characters that pop up from time to time, most of whom are voiced by Sharon Mann in the English version, who has a surprisingly really versatile voice.
Now then, why don't you have a nice big slice of grapefruit quiche?
Silence! Stinking asswipe! You dare to speak to me with that ridiculous little thing?
But of course, there's one voice actress that is synonymous with this show in the French version for Peepoodo himself, and that being Brigitte Lecordier.
Bonjour, Kevin. Eh ben, quel appétit! C'est ton petit déjeuner?
Huh, her last name kinda sounds like Recorder. Guess it's fitting she became a voice actress.
Oh, believe me, the kind of character she's lended her voice to, you will not believe. If you live outside of France or are not familiar with the French cartoon scene, her name won't mean that much to you. But to give you the rundown, she was the voice of Gohan in the French dub of Dragon Ball.
C'est ça, mais qu'est-ce que tu fais là?
And most significantly, and I'm not making this up, she was the voice of Noddy in the French version of Noddy in Toyland.
Quelqu'un fait des cadeaux à tous nos bons amis voitures. Je me demande ce que c'est.
You're kidding.
No, I am most certainly not. Yes, the main character of the most explicit, raunchy, and straight-up filthy cartoon I have ever seen was also the voice of what is probably the most quintessential young children's character of all time. Just through that alone, this show's awesomeness levels have reached epic proportions, and Brigitte does an incredible job, hands down the best voice in all versions of this show, giving Peepoodo an incredibly exaggerated high-pitched cartoony character's voice, but like Barbara, it never goes into the realm of annoying, and the fact that it is so exaggerated and childlike makes what Peepoodo says and does within the episode, especially during the finale of both series, unbelievably funny.
Je suis désolée. désolée d'avoir tué le Papa Noël. Je suis désolée.
What next? The guy who voiced Fritz the cat was also the voice of Paddington Bear? Or that double marshmallow woman is also the voice of Iggle Piggle?
Actually, that would be kinda cool. Maybe then I'd watch that show. Speaking of which, it's probably time I get into the backstory of how I came to discover this series. As I said before, a lot of people were introduced to Balak through his previous work, the comic Last Man. However, I started down the path of finding out about this show due to a random YouTube video I happened to come across late one night.
All alone, in your bedroom, with a box of tissues and some hand moisturizer, no doubt.
How dare you accuse me of masturbating?
Who said anything about masturbating?
For some reasons, I just happened to come across this video and clicked on it, and due to not having any sort of context behind it, since not only have I never heard of this guy before, I'd also never heard of the woman who was starring in it, so I was intrigued to delve deeper, and well, let's just say that going down that rabbit hole led me to quite a few surprises. Which is fitting considering that the first episode actually does involve rabbits, although they're delving down a different kind of hole. However, as I started to look further into it and watch more of the show, I started to realise that Balak's overall style is to have things of a more sexual nature, but he's not just trying to make things sexy, what he's trying to do is to promote sex positivity and more unconventional forms of beauty, which of course is done in those Maxine videos since she's a much more plus-sized girl and has more of an unbidden approach to having body hair, although that could just be because Balak is French, who knows. And that carries on to Peepoodo as well. Admittedly, it does indulge in slightly more conventional forms of beauty with some of his characters like Tuffalo and Dr. Pussycat, who do look like the sort of people you would normally see in a conventional porn. But the fact that the show goes into not only a very sexy side of things, but also explores the very ugly and awkward elements of sex, I actually think is a very good way of promoting an idea that sex is not something that we should necessarily be ashamed of or consider a filthy, disgusting act, but also goes into the other direction and showing how sex is not always a very glamorous thing and can be very ugly sometimes. So it's a great way of showing off what sex actually is in a way that feels very natural in its own way. I've always had very good respect for the pornography business, but even I'll admit it's not the best way of presenting sex to the general public, at least of those, of course, who are old enough to actually watch it.
I doubt that stopped you back when you were an adolescent, am I right?
Let's not get into that now, shall we? As porn does very much over-glamorize sex, and it's not the most realistic depiction of it, of what it can be to most people. And to be fair, it's not trying to be, and the same goes for erotic thriller movies and TV shows, which are not only very unrealistic depictions of sex, but oftentimes they're not even that sexy. So I always do respect it when more explicit shows, or really any form of media, try to show sex in a more realistic way, but not try and look down on it, since I think there are a lot of people who do have hang-ups about it, and when something like a TV show says that we shouldn't feel ashamed or awkward about it, it can really help a lot of people. Even I'll admit that there are some jokes in the series that aren't really that good some of the time, and they feel like they're doing some rather cheap shots or just going straight for the gross out appeal, but the deeper meaning of the show I think is incredibly laudable in what they're doing, and I think it's a mentality that I think more shows and movies should have these days. And it's especially good when it gets into the development of Peepoodo as a character, which, yes, he actually does have character development. In fact, most of the characters do, which I think is really impressive, and not just how ridiculous this series is, but also how short the episodes are and that they're able to achieve something like that. It's legit really impressive. His major arc is more subtle throughout the first series in how he often feels very uncomfortable and ashamed when any of the more sexual elements of the show come about. And naturally this probably gives him a rather deep-seated inferiority complex, which comes to a head in the penultimate episode of the first series, where a dominatrix wolf, now there's a sentence I never thought I'd say.
And yet again, the foxes are misrepresented by not having her be a fox.
Actually, I think they're doing you a favour by having it not be a fox because, well, this character isn't exactly the most likeable. She taunts and teases Peepoodo for having a very small penis and just being a runty beta male, which unlocks all the resentment and anger he's been carrying with him for probably a pretty long time, and unlocks his, and again, I'm not kidding here, the final form of his penis. From this point on, this and the following episode are more or less a spoof of the classic anime movie Akira, with Peepoodo taking the form of Tetsuo, just instead of having a weird mutant arm, he has a giant mutant penis, and the other characters, in particular Dr. Pussycat, taking on the form of Kaneda and trying to stop him from destroying the world with his penis. You know, I can't tell if this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever had to say out loud, or if I'm witnessing the most awesome thing I've ever seen in my life.
What? After all these years about talking about animals killing each other, toys coming to life, and secret agent rodents, and this is the thing you think is finally the one that is the pinnacle of weirdness?
Yeah, I really think it is. Unfortunately, while they are able to calm Peepoodo down, they do it a bit too late and he does end up destroying the world. Well, they do say that toxic masculinity will one day destroy the world, but I didn't think they meant it literally. Which leads us into the second series. This series drops the kids show orientated forest setting for the most part and goes for more of a spoof of a sci-fi series. A bit of an odd choice, I will grant you, but it's an interesting way of changing up the setting, but not the characters, in that classic Looney Tunes style of writing. Plus, it's also a good way of upping the scale, which I think was probably called for since the second series was made with the aid of a Kickstarter campaign, and, well, you want to give the backers what they paid for. The first episode starts off as a sort of meta-commentary of Peepoodo and the gang being literally censored by the corporation who ran the show originally, but then getting saved by the backers of the Kickstarter campaign, who give them their own ship and tell them that in order to restore the planet Earth, because I guess that even with this weird fourth wall breaking episode, the events of the previous series still happened in canon.
Well, we're ones to talk. I do something crazy at the end of every episode now, and then we never acknowledge it in the next one.
Given the subject matter of this review, I dread thinking about what you're going to do at the end of this video. They need to head to the center of the universe in order to undo the damage that Peepoodo did. After that, the show essentially becomes like Red Dwarf, but with more sex jokes in it. Not that Red Dwarf was absent of having sex jokes itself.
Has anybody got any whipped cream?
But I highly doubt they'd be able to get away with the kind of jokes that this series does. In fact, the second episode of the series is very similar to the plot of the Red Dwarf episode Rimmerworld, where here the characters get their possessions back, but Dr. Pussycat accidentally drops Tuffalo's favourite Bukkake DVD, which just happens to star her in it, into a wormhole, and when she goes in to retrieve it, she finds that several centuries have passed due to the time dilation nature of a wormhole, and an entire cult has popped up based around the content of the DVD, and she's revered as a saint as because of it. You know, you'd think with a show with a very original premise, they'd be a bit less derivative with their episode plots. In all seriousness though, even though on the surface some of the episodes do have very similar premises to other sci-fi stories I've seen before, for example, there's another episode where the premise is basically the same as the Doctor Who episode Last Christmas, it's not really about the plots of the episodes but about the jokes and seeing our characters go through these circumstances, because even with a somewhat derivative plot, these are still characters unlike any we've seen before in probably any sort of fiction, and it is still a blast because some of the ways in which they actually do these stories are absolutely ridiculous, but also a ton of fun. Admittedly, Evelyn and Tuffalo do get pushed more into the background in this particular series, and in a certain aspect even Peepoodo does, as they seem to be more pushing having Dr. Pussycat be the main character than the other ones were, which is okay, she is a great character, but I do prefer the focus being more on Peepoodo. But we still have some great episodes, and the more sci-fi setting definitely allows them to do more with the jokes and characters. There's one where they go to a planet of living plants, one where they go to a coliseum of sex warriors, and one where Dr. Pussycat and Tuffalo get their minds switched. Again, ripping off Red Dwarf here.
No Welshing.
Of course not.
And then there's the final episode, which finally puts the focus back on Peepoodo, and is something where I don't even dare mention a single second of it, because believe me when I say that it's something that has to be seen to be believed. You will have not seen anything like it in your life, and probably won't be able to see anything like it ever again. It's like the 2001 A Space Odyssey of sex comedies, and like 2001, once you've seen it once, you'll never be able to forget it. The animation and writing also feels a bit more sophisticated than the first series, whereas with the first series you can tell there were a lot of different writers writers and animators doing individual episodes. This one definitely feels more like there was a head looking over everybody, making sure that everything felt like it was all done by the same person. So it definitely feels more organised than the first series. That's also probably why this series has less episodes in it, but I'll go for quality over quantity any day. Regardless of that, both series are amazing and definitely are something that I think everybody should watch at least even 1 or 2 episodes of, because even if you're not into it, I guarantee you will not see anything like this ever again for the rest of your life. And so ends my first step into a more sticky side of the internet, but it's still something that is more than just straight up porn, and hopefully this won't end up with us going down too much of a tube slide of debauchery. Isn't that right, Huck? Huck?
Wait a minute. There's something wrong about this place. I know! This furry site doesn't have an adult content filter. Enjoy dealing with COPPA, you filthy animals.
What was her problem?
I don't know. But it seems someone lied about their age at the door.
I think I've found my new haunt for a Saturday night. But for now, I've had enough of this. I'm going on the other side to have a bath. Bye!
Je m'appelle Peepoodo, j'aime bien chanter quand il fait beau. Ensemble on fait les fous, on dit bonjour aux animaux.
Chaque jour est un mystère, c'est l'aventure qui nous attend.
Ah là là, je me demande ce qu'il va bien nous arriver.